Welcome you all this evening. What a great crowd we have. I'm particularly pleased to see so many students in the audience, and I welcome all of you students and the many members of the community who are here tonight. Tonight's event is presented by the Riley Institute at Furman, and the Riley Institute is hosting tonight's speaker, Angela Maria Kelley, for an entire week of interactions with students and faculty as part of the Woodrow Wilson Visiting Fellows Program. The Woodrow Wilson Visiting Fellows Program brings prominent journalists, diplomats, and other leaders to college campuses to engage in substantive dialogue with faculty and students. Ms. Kelley is the 20th Woodrow Wilson Visiting Fellow to come to Furman's campus. Past Woodrow Wilson Visiting Fellows at Furman have included former Governor of New Jersey and head of the EPA, Christine Todd Whitman, and former Maine Governor John Baldacci, U.S. Ambassadors Thomas Boyett and Robin Sanders, and leading pollster and public opinion analyst Peter Hart, just to name a few. Some of you here tonight have had the chance already this week to talk with Ms. Kelley. In fact, she has spoken to many of you in classes and small groups, having meals with students, and just a few minutes ago had dinner with about 40 students where she shared a little bit about her personal career path. Thank you, Angie, for being here and addressing and adding these enriching opportunities to our students' experience and education here at Furman. We appreciate it. Before I invite Dr. Arciniega to the stage, I want to ask for your participation in tonight's program. Ms. Kelley will speak for about 25 minutes, and then she and Dr. Arciniega will have an onstage conversation. During the last 15 minutes of the program, we will ask for your questions. If you would like to ask our speakers a question, please text your question to the number on the screen behind. In order to include as many questions as possible, Dr. Bouquet Ostas is at the computer along with a couple of the Riley Institute Advanced Team students to select questions as they come in, and the students will read them for all to hear. You may text your questions at any time during the program. We would love to hear what's on your mind. Again, the number is 864-688-9368. The topic of immigration is one that raises a lot of emotions and one around which people often hear bits of news, but don't always have the time or opportunity to have a full understanding of what our country's policies are or what they have been. Tonight, we have the wonderful chance to hear from an expert about what our current immigration policies are, how and why we have the policies that we do, and how President Trump, if reelected, or the Democratic nominee, if elected, might influence the trajectory of immigration in America. Whatever your politics, I invite you to listen with an ear to what might be motivating the emotions from the other side of the aisle as we hear Ms. Kelley speak on immigration policy and politics in 2020, separating fact from fiction. At this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Brittany Arciniega, Assistant Professor of Politics and International Affairs, to come and introduce our speaker at the podium. In addition to her teaching and research, Dr. Arciniega represents immigrant crime victims with the assistance of Furman student interns as part of a new legal clinic, the Justicia Project. Brittany, welcome.
Hello. The story of immigration is the story of our country. The story of the United States from the earliest days of colonization is a story of people arriving from elsewhere. Some arrived voluntarily, others arrived in chains. To study our country's history is to study the movement of people from all across the globe to this continent. Immigrants are and have always been important to this nation. Even casual observers of American politics will understand that immigration is now a fraught topic. Despite the important role that immigrants have played, in shaping our nation. Immigration policy featured prominently in Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, and continues to absorb the energy, attention, as well as the budget of our executive branch. Immigration policy will undoubtedly play a key role in the 2020 election that is now less than 9 months away. Given the importance of immigration, both historically and in our contemporary politics, we are so fortunate to have with us tonight one of our country's foremost experts on immigration, Angie Kelley. I've spent the last couple of days basking in her glow, as have many of you, and am so excited to introduce you all to her. Angie exemplifies what it means to follow a passion rather than a paycheck. What has struck me over the past few days is the way in which her career has tracked a devotion to what she calls her North Star, immigrants in general and undocumented immigrants in particular. Like many of us who wound up working in immigration, she didn't initially attend law school with this in mind. She knew she wanted to be an advocate for marginalized people, and she attended the George Washington University Law School to pursue that goal. While her classmates chased corporate law positions, no heat to the corporate lawyers in the room. I love you. I see some of the folks I work with at Weich. While her classmates chased corporate law positions, Angie took a markedly different path and was awarded a Georgetown University Law School Women's Law and Public Policy Fellowship. Her first job out of law school was not as an immigration attorney. Instead, she worked at a legal services agency called Ayuda, which means help in Spanish. There, she represented victims of domestic violence, many of whom were undocumented. She learned that what kept many of her clients in abusive relationships was often their legal status or lack thereof. Victims of domestic violence, often women, are always vulnerable, but immigrant victims even more so. Angie soon started appearing in immigration court on behalf of her clients, where she learned a lesson that would transform her career. And now it seems obvious, but our immigration system is highly political. Angie decided that she wanted to join this immigration policy conversation. And she's been working in that space with increasing responsibility for more than 2 decades. She's held leadership positions in a number of national immigration think tanks, ranging from the National Immigration Forum and the Immigration Policy Center to the Center for American Progress. She even served, dream job, as a consultant in the White House for immigration under the Obama administration in 2014. She's currently the Senior Strategic Advisor for Immigration at the Open Society Foundations and Open Society Policy Center. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Angie Kelley to the stage.
I was sitting there going, wow, that Angie person, that's amazing. Brittany, thank you. Thank you very much. I feel like I've won an award and I need to thank everybody. But I do need to thank a lot of folks. So Dr. Summers, thank you very much. Brittany, that was really very lovely. The faculty, you guys have been just so wonderful. The people at the Riley Institute, you rock. These are amazing ladies and gentlemen. I just met you today, Don. So thank you. But it's that advanced team. Man, these are like top-notch young people that have really made this a very special week for me. I haven't felt this well cared for since I went into labor when I was having a baby. So seriously, people don't usually pay anywhere near as much attention to me. I've got kind of like a really big job here because in now less than 23 minutes, I have to like lay out for you what is arguably the most complex area of law in the United States, what is arguably the most emotional area of political discussion today, and something that many of us kind of feel personally, right? Either because we are immigrants, we're the children of immigrants, we're the grandchildren of immigrants, there's like a story there. And so I'm going to do my best, but I also welcome your questions. So I really, I think in threes. I don't do technology particularly well in any number. But here's the kind of three big topics that I thought we could talk about. One is, what's the best legal immigration system for the United States? Like, what would make sense in terms of who should come here, how many, where should they go, like that. The second is, what should we do about undocumented immigrants, right? Because there's a lot of discussion about them. How do they get here? Why aren't they legal? Can they get in a line, go to a post office and get their green card? What's up? And then the third is, what about immigrants in legal limbo? And so those are people who are young, many of them who have something called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then another group that's been here even longer that have something called temporary protected status. And then I'm going to end with the video, if I can make it work, that will have like a surprise closing speaker. So let's give this a go. I wanted to start with these two quotes because I thought that they were kind of an interesting contrast to each other, and they sort of set the stage, right? So the conflicting stances on immigration. Quote one, our country is full, can't take you anymore, so turn around. Who said that? Guess. Donald Trump, that's exactly right. And then someone very close to Donald Trump said the following: we are desperate for more people. We are running out of people to fuel the economic growth that we've had in our nation over the last 4 years. We need more immigrants. Who said that? That's right, Mick Mulvaney, the chief of staff to Donald Trump, who I can tell you from very cool experience, sits right next to the Oval Office. Very different perspectives. And let's dig a little bit into why that might be. So this is arguably the ugliest slide I will show you, I promise. And I'm not going to read everything up here, but it's a pie chart. And the idea here is to just give you a sense of how do people get here legally, right? So the biggest chunk of the pie are people that are called immediate relatives of U.S. citizens. And so these are the folks that are the closest to us. They're our spouses, our minor children, and our parents. And those are people that can be applied for by somebody who is a U.S. citizen and can get that kind of visa or green card very readily. There are not limits on that. That's a good thing, we think, right? There are also family-sponsored preference categories, which is a lot smaller. It's only 21%. And what that means is that there's actually limits on these relationships. And these relationships, it's so interesting to me because I have two daughters. One is 19 and one is 23. The 19-year-old would be in the purple slice of the pie because she's under 21. If I wanted to bring her to the United States, no problem. She wouldn't have to wait in line. Isabel, who's 23, the oldest, she is in the green part of the pie as a family preference, in the family preference category because she's over 21. She's unmarried. And if I were to try to bring her to the United States, I would have to wait 3 years. So that is very typical in immigrant families where you've got folks that might be different ages, different statuses, and there's different waiting times. Employment-based immigration is about 15% of our overall legal immigration. That's in blue, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail in a few minutes. Refugees and asylees has been 14%. That number is dropping because we're letting in a lot fewer people. And then diversity lottery winners is a very small segment, and that's kind of a funky category. That is for people who live in countries that don't have a lot of representation in the U.S., so a country doesn't qualify if it's like Mexico, because there's a lot of Mexicans in the United States. But really all of Africa, that's how many African immigrants apply through this diversity lottery, go through a background check, show that they have graduated from high school, have worked for at least 2 years. If they get as lucky to win a diversity visa, they can come to the United States. So that, in effect, is the basic landscape of how you can come to the United States. Very tight family categories under family-sponsored, relatively much more easy if it's a minor child, a spouse, or a parent. And then over there, is a very nice, attractive young woman who is in a fake green card, but that just gives you an idea of really what it is that people are trying to achieve. So I love this slide. When was the last time that Congress updated legal immigration? So this is what I would do on a Friday, is I would go to Blockbuster Video, I would aspire to drive what would eventually become SUVs. That's the kind of computer that we used to have at work. And I just love that outfit. I loved her. I still get sad when I think about what happened. I don't think I could pull the hat off, but this was 1990. So the last time that we updated our immigration laws was 30 years ago. And so what does that mean? Well, what that means is that when you think about employment-based immigration, right, which already is not a particularly big slice of the pie, remember? There is a set number of visas for people who are coming to the United States, whether they're rocket scientists, super athletes, artists. That's a visa category that's usually not backlogged, can get backlogged. But for other categories, that's Melania there, you might recognize her, also not backlogged because she is a model. People in the middle, right, are the top, who are workers who have advanced degrees. Those are visa categories that can get backlogged. And then people who pick our fruit and vegetables, people who landscape, people who looked after my grandmother until she passed away last March, people who looked after my kids when they were babies, the lesser skilled workers. There's 5,000 visas a year for the entire country, for all year. And that fundamentally is the real mismatch between we've got jobs on this side of the border, right? And we've got employers saying, come on, come on, come on, green light, come in. But then we stop them because they don't have a legal way to come to the United States. There is no visa, there's no line for them to get into if they're in a lesser skill category. People also talk often about, well, you've got employment-based immigration, then we need that, too much family immigration. We really need people to come as workers, just come as workers. Now, the funny thing about that is that if a family member comes, they're also probably going to work. They're going to be an economic actor. And if they come to work, they're probably going to have family, right? So it's really the combination of the two. And I have some fun pictures to show you to illustrate this. Okay, in the top left corner, we have my Aunt Emmy, my mom. On the far right, my Aunt Susie, and Adalberto Violand. Adalberto was my grandfather. Wasn't he handsome? And those are my mom and two of her sisters. My grandparents sent all 6 of their daughters over time from Bolivia to the United States. And these are the 3 oldest, my mom being the oldest. She still boasts about that all the time, how special she is. And what did they do? They came to the United States. They married, they fell in love, they married. Most of them married tall white guys, like I did too. Love the tall white people. And there I am, I have to tell you, in that cute little white dress, really pissed off, like this, that I got dragged to be in this wedding that I didn't want to be in because I only wanted to wear jeans. And then you fast forward from what was that, maybe 1970? This was Thanksgiving at my house, my aunt's house last year. And my husband was like, oh my God, if you show that picture, they're all gonna think that they brought all these people in. No. My mom, who's remarried 5 times, different story. I've worked it out on the therapy couch. My aunts, who've also remarried, but not as many times, because my mom is the oldest, she excels at everything, had kids. They had me. And then I had 2 kids, right? We're all fluent English speakers. We're all employed. We're all contributing. And that's the genius of this country, right? We come, we work, fall in love, we have families, we change America, America changes us. That's the special secret sauce. So when we talk about what do we do with legal immigration, right? Is it family? Is it employment? I think the questions are more based on flexibility. We have the same number of visas every year since 1990. Every year. Think about how much has changed in our economy. Greatest economy in the world. Same number of visas. If that was a business model, you'd be out of business. absolutely need to have flexibility based on what the country needs. Secondly, I think that the states should have a say in it, right? There's a lot of people in certain states, but in like North Dakota where they're dying for doctors, I think they should have a say in it, and right now they don't. And then finally, I think stable families. We do better when we're with people we love and who love us, right? So to cut off family immigration and say it's all going to be about employment, I think will make us less happy, less stable, less joyful. Now going to move to talking about the undocumented. The undocumented, who and why? So on the cover of Time magazine in 2012, I believe it was this young man. His name is Jose Antonio Vargas. Jose was sent to the United States when he was 12 years old by his mother from the Philippines to live with her parents, with his grandparents. He was sent to the United States to live with his grandparents with what he told was a green card and by a gentleman that was introduced to him as his uncle. Jose came to the US, did great in school. When he was 16 years old, he went to get a driver's license, like any kid, shows the card that he was told was a green card. And the woman at DMV says, "This is fake, put it back, leave and never come back again." Jose didn't know that his mom had sent him to the United States for a better life because she couldn't provide for him, so he could live with his grandparents, who cannot sponsor him, remember, that's not a family category. And he didn't know. And he was on track to go to college, and he did because the principal found out about it and made sure that he got into school. And there were people in the community that found out about it, and they gave him scholarships. Then he was hired by the Washington Post, because he was a spectacular reporter. He covered the Virginia Tech massacre, remember the shooting many years ago, and with a team of other reporters won the Pulitzer Prize. He came out as gay, and then years later came out as undocumented in a New York Times op-ed. That's courage. That's courage. But he was able to do that. He was able to succeed because people helped him, and they saw in him something. They saw him as a young person that he was going to contribute, and they didn't just see him because of the fake green card. So there's 11 million people, the size of the state of Ohio, who don't have status, and they didn't just get here. 64% have been here for 10 years, 21% for 20. The average is about 13. As I like to say, these are not accidental tourists that have stumbled into the US, enjoyed Disney World, and are, sitting having breakfast with the princesses. These are people who are very deeply rooted. 90% of them live with family members. About half of that are with a partner or a spouse. And then about half of that is with a US citizen. A lot of people who are married to US citizens do not have legal status in this country. They're hard workers, they're employed, and 34% of them own their own homes. So I don't know about you guys, but paying taxes, having a mortgage, and having kids is pretty much quintessentially American. So those are the undocumented. Why haven't they gotten to a position where they've been able to get legal status? It's because as much change as is possible in immigration policy through the executive branch, a president cannot give green cards. It has to be an act of Congress. It has to be. And I thought this was a kind of funny cartoon, right? And this is so DC. Like, oh, we're working on it. And then you've got people on the other side of a very big canyon that wait and wait and wait. That happens in a lot of issue areas. That's happening to our planet. But I'm just going to talk about immigration tonight. I could go on about the planet. Hang on one second, guys. Oh my God, I forgot to even look at my notes, so I hope it's making sense. So we've got these folks that are in the US. The only way that they're going to be able to get eventual legal status is if Congress acts. And in the meantime, some of them have gotten some level of protection, and some have none. And I'm going to talk about that last. So living in legal limbo, what does that mean? That means that we have people who are in the United States that are known to the Department of Homeland Security. They've come forward, they've applied, and they have been given work authorization, and they've been protected that they've been promised that they won't be deported unless they commit a crime and, they break the terms under which they've been given protection. So we've got about 700,000 young people that have something called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. I'd mentioned it a few minutes ago. And so this is when President Obama was putting forward this executive order. Joe Biden, who always likes to be next to Obama, he talks about it all the time. No diss to Joe Biden. But what the Deferred Action Program is about is that there's a lot of resources that can be dedicated to going after people who are here without papers. But there's not enough resources that we could deport all 11 million people. So there's discretion that gets used, right? Prosecutorial discretion. Who are you going to go after? Who are you going to focus on the enforcement resources? And what President Obama did, with a bit of persuasion by some advocates, is he created this program that said, okay, I can't just give you a green card, but I'm going to give you work authorization protection against deportation. 700,000 young people have come forward and applied for it. And this is something that I carry, honestly, some guilt about, because we encourage them to come forward. So they've given their information, their name, the address, where they live, and where their parents live. And when Obama left office and Trump took office, his attorney general at the time, why am I blanking on his name? Sessions. Sorry, it's because it's such a terrifying thought. Just that voice, it just drove me crazy. He's terminated the program. So the program was then stopped, but people weren't put in deportation proceedings because there was an injunction put in place. There was a rush to the court. There was an injunction put in place. And so they couldn't begin removing people from the U.S. as their work authorizations began to expire. They had to keep renewing the work authorizations of the young people that have DACA. But the case has been winding its way up through the courts. And last November, the Supreme Court heard argument on DACA and whether or not it can be continued, whether it was legal, illegal for Trump to end the program. We're going to have a decision sometime this spring. And as I've been saying in all the days I've been here, you all will remember this night that we talked about this, because it is going to be a top story. It is going to be an issue that will be widely discussed in all the debates to come. It's going to be an issue where Congress, on the precipice of a big canyon, may actually have to take some action. So we'll see. I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know that it is very possible that we will start deporting 700,000 young people. Another group of people have temporary protected status. These are folks that were in the U.S., something happened in their country, an earthquake, hurricane, a natural disaster, and it's unsafe for them to go back. And we have a generous provision in our laws that says that if you are in the U.S., as of the day that we say, Haitians, it's unsafe for you to go back, then you can be given work authorization, protection from deportation. Again, not green card, president can't do that. So there are a number of countries, you see them listed there, who have gotten this over the many years. And in El Salvador, for example, or of the Salvadorans that have TPS, they have been here since 2001. There's about 200,000 of them. And this has been their home for all these years. And now they're very close to being upended and also being deported. What is keeping that program in place is another court injunction. So you're seeing the interplay of the different branches of government. I don't know what's going to happen. This decision could probably come down in the next few months as well. So if you add up the numbers, we're talking about over 1 million people who've been here for many years that may soon not be here. So this may not be the issue that you guys think about and talk about all the time. I get that. It is the issue that other communities do talk about. And many of you sitting here really do have a voice, right? You can vote, you can reach out, you can volunteer, you can ask questions. I want you to ask me a lot of questions. Because I think until we have a civilized, sober conversation about immigration and what does this country need in a way that people can see themselves in the policy, right? And what do newcomers need so that they feel welcomed, right? So we can live up to the genius of this country. This is a person who I don't find myself, oh, wait a minute, I forgot about this slide, ha! So hang on, I'm gonna get to this mystery person. Where are the presidential candidates? It's actually pretty easy for you all to figure this out, right? And my young assistant who put this together, I don't think likes Amy Klobuchar, because she left her off. And you all know the TV show Veep, that she's the character that it's based on, so they say. In any case, I go off topic. But surely the Democratic candidates in the subjects that I've covered with you would, in fact, want to revamp legal immigration. They, in fact, would want to find a way to provide protection and working with Congress, a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented, and they, in fact, would do something to protect those who have DACA. I think most of them have talked about TPS as well. With President Trump, on legal immigration, it's been really mixed. We don't know. He's put forward some ideas about a merit system that sounds really good. Who doesn't like merit, right? It's good. Demerit bad, merit good. But it's not clear what kind of cuts he would make to family immigration. So I kind of feel like he may be doing a trade-off. But again, we don't really know. We know his chief of staff thinks that there should be more people here. He has been clear, though, about not working to try to resolve the status of the 11 million who are undocumented. And of course, it was his administration that ended DACA. So we know where he stands on that. So that's the lineup around this important issue. And here's somebody, darn, I forgot that his name was up there, that I don't quote very often.
Story. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. Neither one of my parents graduated high school. My dad and mom ran a restaurant, a liquor store, and a pool room. And I learned everything I needed to know about politics in the pool room. Great place to learn about people. But one of the critics of this bill, one of the organizations said that the average illegal immigrant has a 10th grade education. Well, all I can tell you is you got a United States senator who came from parents that didn't have a 10th grade education. To those who believe that how long you go to school determines your character, how much money is in the bank determines your worth, they really don't understand America. All in America can you do what Senator Rubio's done, and my parents have long since passed. When I was 21, my mom died, 17 years younger than my dad. We thought he would go first, but life just is not so understandable and predictable. She went first, and 15 months later, he passes. My sister was 12. An aunt and uncle helped raise my sister. They never made over $30,000 in their life. They worked in the textile plants. And she has turned out great in spite of having an overbearing brother. But I'm in the United States Senate today. Why? Because I live in a country where anything is possible. And there are a lot of self-made people in America. I am not one of them. If it weren't for my family and my friends, I would not be here today. To those who say that among this illegal immigrant population, they're just not well educated, you have no idea how offensive that is to a guy like me. So you can take your criticism, and we'll just end it at that.
Oh, sorry. I created a bunch of boxes there. My apologies. He's a colorful guy, and he was once one of the biggest champions for comprehensive immigration reform. He has lost his way in the view of many, but I do think that his connection to his family, that he could see himself being a senator, like I can see myself having the privilege to stand up here and to speak to so many of you, Like that is what this country's about. It's why my grandmother did an impossible thing and put her daughter on an airplane and sent her to Washington, D.C. to live with a spinster aunt. And my mom met my dad in the one movie theater that showed movies in Spanish in Adams Morgan, Washington, D.C., and they had me. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much for that. I would like to start with a question about what states can do in the absence of federal action. So we know that you said that only Congress can give citizenship, can give green cards, but what can states do that impacts the daily life of immigrants?
Sure. They've been doing quite a bit, actually. It's been interesting to see how much reaction there has been in the last 3 years by state and local leaders. So one thing that they can do, and this gets talked about a lot, is they can be very thoughtful about how much local police can interact with immigration agents and be immigration agents themselves. And this is often called sanctuary cities. It's often misunderstood. The sense is that you've got undocumented people that are running around committing crimes and nobody is stopping them and picking them up, and that's just not true. But what it does do is make it safe. It makes it safe for people to feel like I can call the police and you're not going to ask me about my undocumented teenage son. Because what I saw happen across the street with a woman getting beaten, like you want to have people feel safe to call the police. So that's one thing that they can do. The second thing that they can do is if you're raising a family and you've got, and you're paying state taxes, you're paying federal taxes, and your kid graduates from high school, they can get in-state tuition if they go to a college. It's a public university. So for example, my daughters go to the University of Virginia, and it is a terrific thing. The Virginia State House recently passed legislation that undocumented kids could also go if they can qualify and get in-state tuition. Another is it's good to have people who are driving with driver's licenses, who have insurance, so being able to ensure that undocumented people can also get driver's licenses is another concrete thing that they can do at a local level.
On that note, I would encourage you all, if you are interested in what the state of South Carolina is doing or can do, there is currently a bill in our state house, H 3404, that could give those with legal status, including DACA recipients, some of whom go to school at Furman, for example, would allow those folks to get in-state tuition, would allow those folks to be professionally licensed, because as it stands in the state of South Carolina, you can be educated K through 12, right, and graduate from high school in South Carolina. You can have a 4.4 GPA. Is that even possible? Yes. Okay, that's possible. You could have a 4.4 GPA, and if you are a DACA recipient, it doesn't matter. You will not qualify as an in-state resident for the purpose of receiving in-state tuition. So this bill, H 3404, would do that. It's not a perfect fix, right? There are lots of people who still would not be eligible, but for DACA recipients and for those in certain other categories, like the folks that we represent in the clinic here, are recipients of certain crime victim visas, like U visas and T visas, they would also qualify. And professional licensing is a huge thing. So even if you graduate from college in the state of South Carolina, and you are a DACA recipient or undocumented, you can't get a license for any sort of profession, right? You can't be a lawyer, you can't be a teacher, you can't be an electrician. Anything that requires a professional license, you're not eligible for. And that new bill would change that. which is really important because we're losing talent, right? We're losing talented and passionate young people who are going to other states to find work. So call your representatives, encourage them, if you feel so compelled, to support H 3404.
Man, you should give the next speech. That was great.
I gotta put that out there. So another question is you talked about how Sessions ended DACA or ended the prosecutorial discretion associated with, okay, we're going to prioritize these people for deportation and not prioritize these people. So what happens when that direction is taken away? What happens in the executive branch? What happens to people working in DHS?
Well, it depends on how the program is struck down. I suspect that it probably will be. It's not that they will lose discretion. The basis will be that that it's a legal act for him to end it. And I think that is probably what the Supreme Court justices are going to say. So it's not like taking away discretion from the executive branch or DHS in any way. It's more saying that, you know what, you're the president, you can do this. Yeah.
So on that, there's a little bit of a lag when you turn it back on. What I was thinking about is how part of what DACA did was it was a directive aimed at folks in the executive branch, aimed at folks working in ICE and CBP. Don't target this group of people for deportation. So when that was removed, let's say an ICE officer right now, you no longer have that direction from the top telling you, target this group, don't target this group. So how are people prioritizing who they're going to target for deportation?
Right, that's a great question. We have 11 million people here without status, and some of them are bad dudes, and we want to figure out who that is and get them out. And that was something that the Obama administration, it took them a while, but they actually, in the course of the 8 years that he was in office, they got very refined at prioritizing where they were going to put enforcement resources. So a lot of resources were at the border. So people who had just come in, they didn't have ties to this country yet, they were the ones that were more likely to be deported more quickly. People who had criminal records, people who were in smuggling rings, people who were trafficking humans, that's really where the attention went. And those can be often very costly operations that take a long time to execute. It's frankly easier to just go into an apartment building where a lot of immigrants live and start knocking on doors and rounding up whoever you can round up. That is easier and less expensive. It's also terrifying and destabilizing to the community. So that's the kind of change that has happened in the last 3 years. And I think what will happen if DACA is struck down, that unfortunately the 700,000 young people will be in that pool that could very easily just get ensnared and be deported.
You mentioned that if the Supreme Court comes out with a certain decision, that this could force Congress, right, on a precipice to take action. What do you think are some different routes forward if Trump is re-elected versus a Democrat elected in November, for how we would concretely deal with that decision?
So I think there's a couple things that could happen. One is if DACA is struck down, we'll have the decision by the end of June. The elections aren't until November, of course. So there's going to be a period of time where I don't think that President Trump is going to want to be seen as deporting a bunch of young people. So I think that it would be easy enough to say that their work authorizations, that they can stay until their work authorizations end. They all end at different days. They can get a blanket extension of work authorizations. So there will be ways that there won't be those kind of shocking, video footage of people being taken away. There could very well be an effort then that I don't think will be limited to just this population, where the White House could go to Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and say, here's my immigration proposal, take it or leave it. And they've done some of this dance before, and it was pretty awful because it became a big mushroom of a lot of different issues, And the DACA kids kind of got lost in that, and the deal fell apart. So that's another possibility. But I'm afraid that some of those same motivations to really change immigration law are probably still going to be there with this administration. And there'll be a lot of resistance if there is a lot that's really kind of, frankly, that is more heavy-handed. Another possibility is in a lame duck, which happens, that's the period of time in Congress after the election, but before the end of the year. And so sometimes there can be deals that can be struck, particularly if it's around when the budget is being passed and the funding for the government is being extended. So you could see like maybe a really narrow thing that will say, we're just going to protect the DACA kids for a year or two. So there could be legislation passed that doesn't give them a green card, but that just protects them for a year or two. That's a kind of compromise I could see happening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I talk to my classes about this, so if you've had me, you've heard about this. I talk a lot about push factors and pull factors when it comes to immigration, and how changing our immigration policy, we can change the pull factors, right? We can change how appealing it is to come here. We can change how easy it is to cross the border. But, and it isn't that easy, but not much of our immigration policy actually addresses the push factors, things that are driving people from their countries of origin. Could you say a little bit about that?
Sure, and they're not talked about because that's not really immigration policy. That's as much about foreign policy or foreign aid. But this is what I've seen in the years that I've been doing this work. And it's been most disturbing in recent years in 3 countries in particular, in Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador, where there are gang forces that the government either can't or won't control, where women and children are the absolute favorite targets of these gangs, where rape is just regularly used as a way of keeping women in these very dangerous, awful situations. And so I was not representing, it's an old habit. I was helping prepare for an interview. Some women who had just come to the US, this was about a year ago, I went to a detention center in Texas. And one Guatemalan woman told a story, I would say she's maybe 24 years old, that was pretty typical of what I was hearing. And that is that she had a 4-year-old son, that she had become the subject of affection and attention by a gang leader who wanted her as his girlfriend, and wanted to bring her into the gang. And there's no love here, right? This is, let's be clear. This is about being in a violent relationship where you will be repeatedly raped. That's what she was up against. And so she was on the playground with her child, and they'd come by the house before and that kind of thing, but she had been able to avoid them. And calling the police did absolutely no good, like no response. So she was on the playground with her 4-year-old son, and the gang came back around, and they pulled a gun out, and they grabbed the kid, and they put the gun to the kid's head. This is the last time we're going to let him off without pulling the trigger if you don't come and join the gang tomorrow. She left that night. She left that night. And then 2.5 weeks later, she was sitting in, as close as Brittany is sitting to me, telling me this story. That's the push factor. So until people have a sense of safety, a sense of hope, that the government will protect them and that there's jobs there and their kids are going to be safe, they're going to leave. I think it would be really smart of our government to work with other governments in the region, figure out what are the conditions we need to create so people don't leave. People don't want to leave home. Home is home. She'd been threatened so many times, but it was when the gun was pulled on her child that she realized that she couldn't stay anymore. But if we could create and help countries create the conditions so that their citizens stay, if we could legalize people who are here, if we could have a legal immigration system so that people come with a visa, legally, not with a smuggler, illegally, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. And I think as a country we're smart enough, like we could do that if we exert that sort of leadership. We just haven't done it yet.
A lot of people who are fleeing situations like that one now find themselves living in tents in Matamoros, Mexico, under this new program called MPP, Migrant Protection Protocols, which is a bit of an ironic name. But MPP has not received a lot of press coverage, at least not in South Carolina. Could you tell us a little bit about what that program is and what it aims to do?
Sure. It's pretty extraordinary. The Mexican government has agreed to help the Border Patrol keep people out of the United States and is holding them on the other side of the border. So there's about 60,000 people, most of them are women and kids, most of them are pretty young, that are waiting to get a number to be able to come into the United States to apply for asylum. And so there's never been that sort of agreement between the US and Mexico. And I don't think it's because the Mexicans suddenly developed like a cold heart or a warm heart, depending on your perspective. But it was around the time that Mexico was being threatened with a lot of tariffs. And that would have brought their economy to its knees. And then these protocols were approved.
Thank you so much for answering my questions. And now it's time for us to turn it over to audience questions. If you have any, please continue to text them to the number on the screen. We've got a couple of students that are going to come up and present the questions that have been submitted so far.
I like this high-tech way that you guys do questions, texting. Very hip.
So I have the first question, then we'll rotate over
gosh, you scared me.
Abby. Oh, yeah.
Hey.
Why is it that the Trump administration won't allow lesser skilled workers to come into the United States when we desperately need them to fill the jobs that Americans won't do?
Great question. It's because the lesser skilled category is one that Congress is the only way that there can be more visas so that people can come legally in the lesser skilled category. There is nothing that Trump could do to increase that, even if he wanted to. So it is an act of Congress that we need.
This is a two-parter. Should people be allowed to cross the border illegally? And if so, how do we control our borders in a humane, logical way?
Great question. No, people should not be allowed to cross the border illegally. That's not good for them. That's not good for us. We have a right to know who's coming to our country. We have a right to screen them, of course. But I also think we have a moral obligation to act as a country that we're good enough. Like, we can resettle some refugees, right? We can offer a woman like the one I saw protection. We can do that. And what we need, and we have a lot of enforcement resources already going to the border. The enforcement budget of the United States government is over $22 billion a year. That's a B billion. It's the largest law enforcement agency by many-fold. So it's not that we've got open borders. We actually have very closed borders, and we don't have the legal visas that the gentleman was asking me about. So what do people do? Well, people who are here already without papers, that at one time there was much more circular migration, particularly when you had young Mexican men that were crossing the border. They would work here, they would go back to their country. Well, people now just don't leave because it's too dangerous to come back in. The nature of who's coming to the US has also really changed. It's not the young Mexican men, because the Mexican economy is doing much better. It's because the birth rate in Mexico has plummeted from what it was in the 1970s, where Mexican women were having 6 kids and now they're having 2. So it's a different flow that we have coming to the US. It's women and kids. And you all might remember around family separation, where you had kids that were sleeping in Custom and Border Patrol offices. Well, it's because they're set up to hold young men. They're not set up to hold kids. And that's why we have, I think, 12 people have died in detention in the last 12 months. It's a huge number. I should have looked that one up, sorry. But we're losing people. We don't need to. We absolutely have a right to control our borders, but I think we have a moral obligation to also protect those that we can, ask other countries to do their fair share.
The next question says, are there certain rights or access to social services that immigrants, both legal and illegal, do not have that native-born citizens do have?
Sure, most of them. Most federal benefits are not available. The only benefit that is available to an undocumented person is a K through 12 education that's protected by a Supreme Court decision from the early 1970s that may very well be challenged, and emergency medical care. So if you run over an undocumented person, they can go to the emergency room. That's about it. And then even legal immigrants have a 5-year waiting period after they've gotten their green card before they're eligible for benefits. Now, some states have made different decisions. So if you live in California, for example, then they offer benefits to people who reside in California, and they don't do immigration checks. So it can really vary by where you live. But at the federal level, benefits are not an option. People are not coming here to get benefits.
How would you address the problem of labor trafficking for migrant and temporary workers across country, state, and local borders?
Yeah, that's a great question. There must be some professors that are teaching about labor trafficking, because I've heard that term several times. There are certain industries that have a lot of undocumented people in them. So agriculture is a great example. Construction is another one. And particularly, you see this in the Florida Panhandle and Alabama, and I guess here in Georgia too, or South Carolina. But along that part of the U.S. where we're getting storms that we've never gotten before. There is a level of destruction that we've never experienced before, and that we need workers to come in and rebuild the houses. And so I actually have a colleague that works helping to organize immigrant workers that come to states like South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, and elsewhere, and help rebuild houses. And the irony is that they're often rebuilding in counties that went overwhelmingly for Trump. And then when the homeowners realize that who is helping put a roof back on their head is an undocumented worker, their views really change.
How do you think climate change will affect future migration, and how do you think world governments will respond to this?
That's a great question. It's already happening. We're really unprepared on climate change in all the ways that we know about, and many more that we don't. And that includes our immigration policies. If you want to come to the U.S. as a refugee, you have to show that you have a well-founded fear of persecution. It has to be on account of one of 5 reasons: your race, your religion, your national origin, your political opinion, your membership in a social group. You're a journalist, journalists get persecuted in your country. You might be able to win asylum. I didn't say anything about climate, because there's nothing for climate refugees. So we've been seeing an uptick in indigenous Guatemalans who are coming to the United States because the land that has been theirs for generation after generation is no longer producing the crops it once produced. And so that is a climate refugee, and there's nothing in our legal framework to protect them.
How did the census citizenship question affect illegal immigrants in our country, and how can this affect the statistics on undocumented immigrants?
This has been one of the few losses that the Trump administration has endured. So an effort to ask about citizenship status on the census is not happening. The census is just getting underway now. So the count will be accurate. Since they don't ask about citizenship status, it will be more accurate because people will be hopefully more likely to answer the question. And so it's not a matter of knowing how many undocumented people there are or not. That's not the way that information is gleaned. I am afraid, though, that even though that question isn't on the census, that we are living in a time of a lot of fear, and that there are a lot of immigration raids happening. And so when people are like knocking on your door, hey, will you fill out this government form? Register to vote? Turn out to vote? So my fear is that we're going to just see a depression in all those things, in participating in the census and turning out to vote, registering to vote, turning out to vote.
This question says, I appreciate the sympathy for immigrants, but can we really justify pulling resources away from American citizens to help citizens of other countries?
That's a great question. No, I don't think that we should be pulling resources away. I think what I'm talking about is expanding resources. I'm talking about people like, my mom and the aunts and the goofy hair. right? They didn't get any benefits. They came to this country, they studied, they fell in love, they worked hard. They don't all have college degrees. My mom doesn't. She's busy getting married. But we all do. We all do. So it is the case that we need to do better by the native born. We need to do better by people who are here. We need to do better so that we don't have the kind of income inequality that we have. So that people don't have to sweat about whether they're going to be able to make that premium on their health care or pay the rent. That's a problem. We're better than that as a country. But I don't think that it's because of immigrants that we have those problems. And I do think that immigrants can help be part of the solution because they want to be.
And I think, to add on to that, that there's been substantial research on the net impact of immigration on the economy showing that when you add everything in, that immigrants add more than they take away. So that they contribute more in taxes and in value to the economy than they take away in the cost of public education or healthcare or other things.
Absolutely true.
Was there anything you were not emotionally prepared for before entering the field of immigration? And this one's for both of y'all to answer.
That I was not emotionally prepared for. I guess I thought that if I just could, speak truth to power, that members of Congress would go, wow, that was a really persuasive argument. Surely. And I guess I do believe that if members could vote anonymously, that we would have had immigration reform done a long time ago. But they like their jobs, and many of them perceive this as being a third rail issue that they can't get near, and that's unfortunate. I think the other thing is about the DACA kids. I worked really hard to get that program with a lot of other people. Oh my God. And the joy that we celebrated when we got that program and we knew that young people would be able to come forward and work, go to school, and now all that information is sitting in the files that can be tapped and they can go after them. That I didn't expect. That really hurts.
I just started practicing immigration law in the past year or so, and I was really not prepared for how hard it would be to sit down across from a senior in high school and tell her. I was the one that had to tell her she was undocumented. I was the one that had to tell her she wasn't actually adopted by the parents that she thought, had brought, went to Central America on a trip, came back with a baby. And I had to tell her that. And not prepared for that, right? You don't learn how to do that in law school. And what that opened up to me was just the million different ways that people end up being undocumented, right? This young woman was raised by people from South Carolina, right? And every single immigration case that we've taken as this new clinic, and my students can attest to this, every single person's story is different, and there is no sort of typical story, right? Everyone's scenario is different, and when you sit down across from someone, right, and look them in the eyes, and you have to tell them, sorry, you can't go to college here. I know that you've been here for 20 years, but sorry, you can't. You're not going to qualify for in-state tuition. Sorry, you can't be a teacher. That is heartbreaking, and I think that the more people that had to have these conversations, right, one-on-one, the more people that had to sit down across from an undocumented person and say, sorry, this is the best we can do for you as a society, that conversation changed me forever. And yeah.
This is our last student question, and it says, what can I do as a college student to help support immigration policies that treat immigrants with dignity?
That's a great question. I love that. And you can help answer this too, because you'll know more concretely. But let me give it a little shot. Yeah. Be informed. So I love that you guys are here. Register to vote. Get your friends to vote. Ultimately, that's what's going to result in change. A professor of yours told me that there's a poultry plant nearby. I'm sure it is full of immigrants. And they probably go to a church, and they're probably looking for assistance from a bright legal mind like Brittany's. And you can be a part of that, right? You can find ways to help them in their community and make them feel welcomed, and help them become Americans, right? Because that's ultimately what they want. But I think the thing that you can do that is perhaps the most important is to speak up. If somebody says something you hear, I wish she'd learn English. God, she'd go back to her home. She should just go back where she's from. These immigrants, they're just getting on welfare. You should say something. Because the worst thing we do is to let that go unchallenged. And it just sits in that person's heart. It burns in them, and you've got the information. So share it. That's what I think people could do. Brittany.
You can take classes while you're here, right? Many different departments offer classes related to immigration to help give you the facts, right? Because without the facts, you can't counter, you don't have the ammunition to respond to someone who believes erroneously that undocumented immigrants are on welfare, right? You can come work for the Justicia Project. I've got a couple of my interns in the room. Where's Alexis? Alexis, will you stand up for a second? So Alexis is filling out asylum applications for people living in tents in Matamoros, Mexico, right? She's doing that. She's a Furman student. She has spent her entire time at Furman learning Spanish and taking politics classes, and now she is helping 5 people apply for asylum. That is an incredible difference, right, that she is making in people's lives. So you can do what Alexis is doing, and you can continue to learn other languages, help people from other places learn English, right? Go volunteer. You can give $5 a month to Lawyers for Good Government, for example, right? If you don't have the time to go volunteer or the language skills to volunteer, give $1 a week, right, to an organization that's putting volunteer lawyers in these places or that is doing the work. You don't have to do the work yourself, right? But you can give 50 cents or $1 or whatever it is to help those who are.
Awesome. Well, that concludes all of our student questions.
How are we looking on time? Okay, so
They just went like this. Mm-hmm. I think we've been going on a bit long.
So before we close, I just want to mention that we've got some great upcoming events with the Riley Institute. So we've got an event on March 31st about China's global rise. April 14th, a conversation with Ezra Klein, who's published a new book on why we are polarized. Polarization, right, has so much to do with why Congress has such a hard time acting in the immigration sphere and other spheres. And then April 21st and 22nd, the South Carolina Supreme Court is coming to Furman's campus, and we'll hear oral arguments in McAllister Auditorium, and you can attend oral arguments and watch our court in action. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Let's thank Angie Kelley for being with us.